So I don't know if we can see the slides there, if we can jump on. So lovely to talk to you all this morning. There's an cited debate that goes on about governance and innovation and whether they can live happily together or not. In fact, Paul Romer and William Nordhaus are economists who studied this in relation to IP and won a Nobel Prize, partly in response to the work they did. And what they found was that under-provision of governance and regulation does hamper innovation because IP is freely copied, there's no incentive to create new IP, there's no financial rewards, and so innovation is hampered. At the opposite end of the scale, over-regulation, over-governance also hampers innovation because it allows monopolies to be created and competition is reduced, and that's also not good for innovation. So in fact, the sweet spot is somewhere in the middle, a balanced set of governance and regulation around things like IP protection, and we can think about this too for our metaverse world that's emerging, where you can create a system of trust, where stakeholders can have trust and truth from appropriate levels of governance that also allow innovation to flow, and that's what we need to think about here. But have we, the metaverse is really the next stage of the web, you could say. It's the immersive internet. There's lots of definitions around that. And we're dealing with governance now at such an early stage, which is a good thing. But we have to deal with from where we are today, which is the governance and regulations that exist around the Web 2 world, the internet today. And we could argue that we haven't done a particularly good job of that. So we've talked a lot today about the kind of challenges that you see, whether it's safety, privacy, cybersecurity, harassment, mental health, addiction, phishing, fraud. These are things that are making headlines around the world and that affect our daily lives both as citizens, consumers, business people, investors. And so that's something that we need to think about. Is there a way, and here's the challenge, is there a way that we can actually come up with governance now for this new world that's emerging and learn some lessons from the past? Is there a way to create a system of governance that provides trust and truth, that protects investors, that protects consumers, that protects employees and workers, that protects children, that protects citizens, while also allowing innovation and the amazing opportunities for incredible experiences and a world-changing environment that we have with the metaverse? Is it possible? And I'd suggest it's actually really difficult to do. One person's protection is another person's censorship. And so actually trying to get a consensus around that's going to be really tough, but it is worth the effort. So I'm going to highlight there's a lot of stakeholders that are going to have to move to create appropriate levels of governance and to make it work, something that we all want to adopt and do adopt. But I'm just going to highlight a few that I think are worth talking about and make a few suggestions. So the first is a lot of people in this room, the industry, people who have a vested interest in making the metaverse work, people who are working on it today, who are those early leaders in all of this. And what the industry, of course, can do is create standards. And so it's very good to see the Metaverse Standards Forum, which has emerged recently. I think it's got 1,900 members. And it's an open forum creating open standards. It's available for anybody to join. And the Metaverse Standards Forum is not actually setting standards. It's a collaborative forum where other standard organizations can come together to have that discussion. And having a discussion is really important. I think the other group that's mobilized, and there are many, but another one I'd highlight is the World Economic Forum. They've got a program that's kicking off specifically around the metaverse and governance, inviting public sector, private sector, thought leaders, academics into a 2-year program to try and really talk about governance in the metaverse. And so we'll hope that these two organizations do well, and there will be others that will emerge. And I think one of the things we might, as a suggestion, think about is what we can learn from other areas. So in sustainability, at a similar stage, there's a lot of fragmentation and a lot of problems around sustainability reporting. So at COP26, there was a call from the capital markets to really get sustainability reporting not just as an optional standard for people to buy into, but as something that is enforced. And around 170 jurisdictions have now been supporting a group that was set up, which is the International Sustainability Standards Board, which has teeth around jurisdiction as well on these topics. This may be something that might emerge out of this group that we might want to learn from and think about. Maybe one or two areas that we think are so important. Maybe it's child safety, maybe it's privacy. To work with regulators to get enforcement and to put teeth behind a few things that really are absolutely required and that we all believe are required to create a system of trust. The other group, speaking of regulators and governments, we are in a world today that is based on the internet, and there's a lot of regulation coming through, and I'm sure you're all familiar with GDPR rules, which came out of Europe, and Europe really does lead the way around data protection and regulation around that. There's a lot more regulation coming out of Europe. There's the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, there's the AI Act coming, there's the Markets in Crypto Assets regulation that's coming. So a lot of regulation coming out of Europe. And for people who are running both businesses in Europe, but also global businesses, these are things that we need to pay attention to, we have to conform to. And the other jurisdictions are also following. We see similar, not the same, but similar types of legislation coming out of the US and abroad, also in Asia. We can also expect to see, I often think of the metaverse and Web3 together. If you think about creating a metaverse economy, you can't help thinking about Web3 and the blockchain and everything that goes with that. And so we've seen the SEC showing up, obviously looking at a lot of these digital assets are starting to look like securities. And so there's been a whole series of enforcement actions, and I think we can expect to see more of that. We have about 20% of the central banks around the world who've already declared they're moving to digital currencies, that they're going to be supporting that, and again we can expect to see more of that. And the tax authorities are obviously going to pay a great deal of attention. Corporate tax, capital gains tax, sales tax, income tax, and so on. So we can expect to see even more regulation. And the question I put to us as a group is this something we want to get ahead of? Work with the regulators in a different way, or will we allow it to continue the way it has been, which is they're reacting to things that are going bad after the event? So in the UK, we've seen some interesting experiments or work going on, not really experiments, they're real, which is around regulatory sandboxes. And so the Information Commission's office in the UK has created a regulatory sandbox where startups who are really trying to push the envelope around privacy and data, they're working with them and giving them a break around some of the regulations. They're giving them a break on licenses for a period of 2 years, and really wanting to work with them to try and help them think about data privacy by design up front. But also, they're watching and learning what it looks like on the edge so that they can build better regulations. We've seen the same with Ofgem in the UK, who are doing the same with the energy sector. And the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau here in the US is working with fintechs in the same way around these regulatory sandboxes. So that's something that we might want to consider, is working with the regulators on people who are pushing to the edge of what we might want to do on the metaverse, and actually work with them so that there is a collaboration and a discussion around regulation and what that might look like as we go. Third group I'd like to highlight quickly is individuals and communities. And I'm really fascinated with the Web3 community ideas that are going on, this whole idea of centralized and decentralized, and communities having a stronger voice. And as somebody who's been on many boards of directors myself over the years, I'm absolutely fascinated with the idea of this new organization structure, decentralized autonomous organizations, which come with a whole new governance mechanism and voting rights. That's disruptive. And I'm really interested to see if communities who maybe don't necessarily have a way to have a seat at the table, who don't have a mechanism to easily organize, to fundraise, to create a community that moves with purpose, can use something like decentralize these DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, to mobilize in a different way. So I think we'll certainly be keeping an eye on that. Another thing that's going on is stakeholder technology, which is again for communities who are interested in topics, maybe it's climate change. Independent startups are starting up to monitor statements and monitor what companies and organizations are doing and saying, to see if they do conform to the standards that they actually declare, and putting data out about that. And I think that's very, very interesting to keep an eye on too. But I would say, there's a lot of underrepresented communities typically when we're building something new and there's disruption going on. and I'm leading the EY Metaverse Labs. And one of the things we started doing a couple of years ago, you can imagine, of course, we hired a lot of creative technologists, Web3 people, we have blockchain people, we have some, fantastic game designers working with us. And of course, we're EY, so we've got accountants and lawyers. We have all those sort of folks sitting beside us as well. But we started hiring and working with artists and musicians a couple of years ago, and the idea there was to really get inside the mindset of the creator economy and to understand what that really takes. It's been fascinating and really informative to stay close to the human condition and to really stay focused on that. And I think the artistic community are so tuned into identity in particular, and what the actual lived human experience is. So that's been very exciting for us and very interesting, and we're continuing to do work there. We're also working with people who are disabled, and we've hired them onto our teams. We have quite a big group who are neurodiverse, and that's been very interesting, thinking about how we've got people with autism who are working with us and telling us what a metaverse experience can look like for them. We've also been working with the blind. We've got some people on our team who are blind, and I have to say, for me, working with designing a metaverse with somebody who's blind is a really eye-opening experience. And I would really encourage you all to spend time with people who are quite different to yourselves, who maybe don't get a seat at the table. In the next couple of weeks, we're also we're working with our EY Foundation around trying to get closer to and create formal structures of parents and children so that we hear their voice and they have a seat at the table. We've been looking at work through the eyes of, people with different cultural backgrounds. We've been doing work with, what would this look like from people of African descent, the Latinx community. And I'll just say to you, it's been incredibly rewarding, informative. It's changing how we work. It's changing how we think. And for all of us who are in this room maybe designing metaverse environments, if you look around the table and you don't think you have room at the table for full cognitive diversity, I might encourage that you get a bigger table and invite people in. And then the last group I'll mention is really business and entrepreneurs. And you can imagine we have a lot of clients who are fascinated by what's going on here. I've mentioned entrepreneurs and startups a few times, so maybe I'll just spend a few minutes on business. We're advising boards of directors and senior leadership teams who are really asking what's going on and how do they need to think about this. If you're on the board and you're a board member, you need to think about what's your job. Insight, oversight, and foresight. And when something goes wrong, not knowing is not an excuse. So it's very important that boards of directors are educated and they educate themselves and that they're experimenting around this. Most of what people are doing now is not material to their business. So as a board director, you're supposed to be noses in and fingers out. That's the expression. You don't get involved, but you keep an eye on things. And so what we're saying to them, although it's not material to the business, there is reputation risk here. And so you need to keep an eye on what's happening, even if it is experimental, just keep an eye on it. The second thing we're advising is around having a more advanced risk management function and really getting a next generation risk management function, people who understand the metaverse, who understand Web3, who understand community, and the kind of business opportunities that are out there, but also the risks, and to really get ahead of that. And the last thing we would say is to create a code of conduct. And all businesses should have a code of conduct for how people operate in their offices, in their plants, in their hotels, in whatever it is that they're operating. And so they can also create a code of conduct for the metaverse and do that now and be willing to enforce it in the same way as they do in the real world. And so these are just a few ideas. There's lots more that we could say on this topic, and plenty of people have lots of opinions on it, and that's a good thing. So keeping the dialogue going is important. My suggestion would be, that there is an opportunity to act now. We don't necessarily have to wait until it all goes wrong. We have an opportunity to learn the lessons of the past. This is not the first time we're all working in the digital environment, and we think we have some idea of what's coming, so we can get ahead of it. There is a need for mass collaboration, and so would obviously encourage that. And this idea of learning from experience, learning from from technology, but also from other sectors and other parts of the world, so that we can bring the best experiences and do our best to try and create this environment of trust, of innovation, to live the most amazingly, incredibly different future that is ahead of us, but to do it in a way that we all feel proud of and that we think is acceptable as human beings. So with that, I'll finish and say thank you very much. In the spirit of connection and collaboration, if anybody wants to reach out and have this conversation, I'd love to have it with you, Edwina Fitzmaurice at ey.com, or you can get me on LinkedIn. Thank you.